All right, we're in the final stretch, best part of the day. We're going to have some great speeches here. First person I'm going to invite up to the stage is from a company called CloudMine. CloudMine is a mobile platform for managing applications that are potentially data intensive, but very much compliance intensive. If you have a mobile application that you need to build and it's going to handle sensitive information, CloudMine is really, really good at that. So let me invite up to the stage Mark Weil from CloudMine.
CloudMine is a mobile gateway. So basically our software sits in between the large set of corporate systems that exist today, like Oracle and SAP, and bridges that data securely out to the wider mobile internet. We've been growing very rapidly. We have a bunch of customers in both the Fortune 100 and the wider Fortune 500. We've seen some great customer growth over the past couple of years, and our goal is to really just keep solving the problems that our clients bring to us that involve mobility and secure data exchange. Rackspace is awesome. Rackspace is willing to roll up its sleeves and work with us to design an optimal architecture for our solution. It's like having our own very at-scale DevOps and engineering team outside of CloudMine that does a lot of the hard work and advising for us. A purely virtual cloud environment isn't necessarily secure enough for all use cases. What Rackspace has allowed us to do is to actually engage in a hybrid cloud deployment where we have bare metal dedicated servers in Rackspace's data centers that are holding all of the HIPAA compliant data. With Rackspace, we know that if we're up at 3 o'clock in the morning debugging a problem for enterprise clients, we also have a phone number that we can call to get our dedicated Rackspace cloud engineers on the phone. So we have a full stack support system from the very lowest level of the bare metal servers all the way up to the application layer, ready to go for our customers. And that's why they choose us over our competitors.
So solving for compliance in a mobile era, that's a big challenge, I think, for a lot of customers. And I think you're using a wide array of our products and services, public cloud, database, hybrid cloud, Object Rocket. Maybe you should tell them firsthand what you're using and how you're taking advantage of Rackspace and solving your challenges.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Weil. I am the CTO of CloudMine, and thank you to John for that nice introduction. This afternoon, I'm here to talk to you about solving compliance in a mobile environment. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about HIPAA compliance. So that's focused really around healthcare. But just real quick, CloudMine, Enterprise Mobile Gateway, and my job there involves product partnerships and security, and HIPAA compliance is kind of my baby, so we'll be getting into a lot of the details today. Before we get into how we solve the problems, though, I want to give you a little bit of background on what mobile health is, who some of the current players in the space are, and how the mobile and health environments together make for some interestingly unique technical environments. So first, mobile health, and I'm taking a quote from GigaOM here. Mobile health is the use of wireless devices to manage health conditions, collect health data, monitor vital signs, provide clinical decision support, and access health information. Fundamentally here, this means it's data. Specifically, it's data collection, usage, and protection. This data can come from a large variety of places. Some common examples are consumer medical devices, such as Fitbit, FDA-approved doctor-prescribed medical devices, such as a pacemaker. And maybe one day we'll have pacemakers with Wi-Fi enablement with Bluetooth LE going on in there. Also, apps on smartphones and electronic health records. These are just some very basic examples of where this type of data can come from. Now, these are some specific applications that we all probably have some experience with. Of course, Fitbit for all of you, quantified self folks in the crowd. This is a band that goes on your wrist and collects information about how many steps you've taken, your heartbeat, how many calories you're burning every day, et cetera. HealthBook is the, I guess, now delayed Apple product that was supposed to come out with iOS 8, but we'll see what happens with that. But that's to collect all of your information in one place. MyChart from Epic for managing your prescriptions, VitalScore, which is actually a customer of ours. They're being demoed up in the Solutions Pavilion, and therefore facilitating communication between your physicians and yourself. iHealthBP is a consumer blood pressure monitor, and VC is a HIPAA-compliant video conferencing solution for doctors and patients. So this really represents a wide range of use cases that are all surrounded by this healthcare data bubble. Now, this environment introduces a number of unique challenges to folks who are implementing these types of services. And those challenges really all surround data security. Now, data security within healthcare is mostly covered by a law called HIPAA, and more recently, an addendum to this law called HITECH. So HIPAA itself was passed in 1996. It's the Healthcare Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And HITECH was passed in 2009 and actually just goes into full effect this year. And that stands for the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health. I know it's a kind of weird acronym, but that's what they chose to make it stand for. And I've underlined these two words here because I want you to notice the difference in focus between the laws from 1996 to today. In 96, this was really around insurance companies. This was around making insurance claims, having insurers pay for your doctor's appointments and your hospital visits, and getting reimbursed for your expenses. But today, this is less about insurance companies and more about just information technology in general. What we're going to do next is we're going to look at what this law actually entails and then how we're going to implement that. So HITECH, again, is an amendment to HIPAA, and both laws are split into two high-level divisions. We have the privacy rule and we have the security rule. In order to be considered HIPAA compliant with your data, you have to comply with both of these rules. The privacy rule is really around the use of data. So this is, you've all probably had to sign a form at your doctor's office at some point saying that you authorize your doctor to share your medical history with a new insurance provider, with a new doctor if you're going to see a specialist. This is all around the privacy rule, you granting that authorization. On the flip side, we have the security rule. And that's where all of the fun stuff comes in with technology. So this is focusing on the technical and physical safeguards of the data. So this is preventing hackers, disgruntled previous employees of insurance organizations and other nefarious individuals from accessing your health data and doing bad things with it. For those who are in the tech crowd out here, this basically boils down to authorization versus authentication, with a little bit of encryption thrown there on the security side. So we have a unique environment that's formed around us now in 2014. First off, this idea of bring your own device, BYOD, now means that employees of all these different types of companies can bring their own iPhones, their own Android devices, their own BlackBerries and Windows phones to work and store corporate data on them and also access live corporate resources instead of having to subscribe to the company-wide BlackBerry plan where central IT could govern everything. So this has really broken corporate firewall strategies and makes it really challenging for CIOs and central IT organizations to control the flow of data from behind the firewall out into the greater public internet. And of course, this also means that once the data is on the device, there's also little control over it. Now, of course, there are mobile application management solutions such as Mobile Iron and Good Data that allow you to sandbox corporate applications on the mobile devices. But these don't have 100% penetration through enterprises, and even where they are used, they're not always configured properly. There's always leaks that occur. So this presents another challenge for people. Of course, the device itself, it's a phone. So you can lose them, you can drop them in a gutter, leave them in a taxi, leave them in a bar. People can access them when they're looking through your pictures and find corporate secrets stored on there. If you're not careful, they flick left and right and they see things they shouldn't. So really, this is making it much easier for data breaches to happen from the perspective of a data security officer. And finally, and less in the face of technical architecture and security, is the infrastructure itself. Many corporations these days who are running their own data centers don't have it set up quite yet to handle mobile traffic patterns. Mobile traffic patterns are fundamentally different from web traffic patterns in that they tend to come from more geographically dispersed locations, and most importantly, they can come from a variety of narrow and wideband cellular connections. It's very different to serve up a web page to a population that's 90% on broadband when compared to serving up JSON or XML data to people who could be coming in over a really high latency edge network or a 3G network, all the way up to high-speed Wi-Fi. So all of these things together create quite an interesting technology and security environment to deal with sensitive data in a mobile context. We also have vagaries within the laws themselves. So HIPAA and HITECH, HITECH, again, it was originally introduced by Congress in 2009. It first went into effect last year. It's in full effect this year. But even then, that law took years to write. And so what happened is that HITECH was designed with the idea of a centrally managed IT infrastructure in mind. They were assuming that there would be hardware firewalls and network-level access controls to all of the data that they were securing. They had no idea when they were writing this that there would be the proliferation of mobile devices that we see today, let alone the access of sensitive medical information that we see on them now. So this has created a law that doesn't really cover all of the edge cases. And unfortunately for all of us, this means that the gray areas of law will be fought out in the courtroom on all of our dimes. So that's a bit unfortunate. Finally, we have other players in the government that are continuing to introduce new legislation that affect our ability to deploy medical-related applications into the market. For example, the FDA just released a change to their definition of a medical device to now include apps running on smartphones. So you can now actually certify an app specifically on a smartphone as a medical device instead of just what it used to be, which was a pacemaker or a hearing aid or some dedicated piece of medical hardware. What this has created is kind of a gray area legal space mixed with a really, really dynamic landscape for all of us to try to keep up with. All right, so I've given you a bit of background now on this, the medical information field, what it takes to secure this data. Now let's get into the good stuff. So how did we at CloudMine create a platform using rack-space tooling that was actually HIPAA compliant, and how do we offer that out to our customers? To understand this, what we're going to do is we're going to focus specifically on the security rule. We're going to sort of push the privacy rule off to the side, since that's mostly paperwork and paper trails. There are 6 major components to the security rule. All of them are listed up here. We really have data encryption at rest as well as in transit. Physical separation of PII and ePHI. What this stands for is personally identifiable information, such as your name and your birthday and your phone number. And ePHI is electronic personal health information. This is things such as past surgery dates, current medical ailments, current prescriptions that you might be on, anything you might imagine being in your health record at your doctor's office. Finally, intrusion detection systems, comprehensive multi-level logging systems, and breach notifications comprise the remaining half of the security rule. When I mean with comprehensive logging, this means not only logging changes made to data to make sure that data integrity is upheld, but also logging access attempts into servers that might have failed or that have succeeded and might not actually have been valid to make sure you know who's accessing your servers and when, what they're doing, whether or not they log into the servers themselves or do something malicious with your app that you've provided them. So first, let's go into how do we separate PII from PHI. And I'm going to use CloudMine as an example simply because I think we've come up with a nice, elegant solution to splitting this data up, and I think you all might find that valuable. This isn't meant to be a CloudMine plug or anything. So I'm going to put a little code up on the screen here. So I have 2 really simple examples of PII and PHI. On the top, these are both JSON objects, by the way. On the top, you can see we have first name, last name, and age. So Jonathan Smith, he's age 53. That's personally identifiable information. And on the bottom, we have his health information. So you can see he has high blood pressure, high HDL cholesterol, diabetes type 2. He's had a couple of different surgeries. This guy is really a mess. He's had a couple of surgeries in the past, specifically on his ACL for some reason, because he's an athlete, of course. And he's on Vicodin. So that would comprise part of his medical record. This is not modeled after a real person, I promise. So really basic examples of what type of data we're splitting up here. One other field that's involved is the PID. This is just my name for patient ID. So high-tech law allows us to have one single field that's shared between PII and PHI, and that field is the patient identifier. It's a unique identifier to that patient whose sole purpose is to link identifiable information with health information. That way, when you're doing the application and you have a practical reason to use data from both of these data sets, you're able to do so, again, so long as you're not storing them on the same machine. So that's going to become important in a moment. Now, the way that we happen to do it with CloudMine is we have on the client side with our iOS and Android and Windows Phone development kits, we have this concept of object stores. This is where you're storing objects locally and where the data gets synchronized up to the cloud. The way that the developers on the client side can tag this information is by using 2 separate stores, one for PII, one for PHI, and they're configured with different API keys. And I'll actually show you in a second how our system knows what to do with it. But suffice it to say that for now, when you save each of those data blocks into these stores, they're stored in the correct location. And this actually makes it really easy for developers to manage the split of data, both in their user interface and when it goes back up. And this is really the responsibility of the developer to make sure they're HIPAA compliant there. So This is a really simplified architecture diagram. I'm seeing this as actually kind of a trend today. We're all sort of epically simplifying our systems into these really three-tiered architectures, but we don't want to give away any secret sauce, right? Basically what we have here is a high-level diagram of CloudMine. You can see at the very top that an API request comes in to a load balancer, very standard. It gets round-robined to some back-end router. That router determines, based on the path, which cluster or which service within our services cluster it routes to. Maybe it's data storage, maybe it's a push notification request or a user account registration request. Then we get to the important part. The important part is the data router. This is the piece that takes the API key from that store that I just showed you previously and determines whether it's PII or PHI based on that key. Once it figures out which one it is, it then routes the data to the correct encrypted database cluster. And we actually use Object Rocket for this, so thank you for that, guys. The Object Rocket's a fantastic Rackspace Mongo system. Once the data goes back into the database, it's then stored and encrypted. Now, technically, high-tech only requires us to encrypt PII. We encrypt both, just to be safe. And we use a product called Gazang Z Encrypt. They were just acquired by Cloudant, so we're switching to something else. But basically, this allows you to encrypt file system contents while they're at rest, and it also helps us with only allowing signed and authenticated processes to access that data. Now, the other important thing I want to point out here that I mentioned earlier is that you're not allowed to use cloud resources to store HIPAA-compliant data, or data that follows this law. Rackspace specifically requires that you use bare metal managed servers in order to qualify for a business associate agreement to complete the HIPAA certification. So what we've done is we're actually using bare metal Dell servers in the Northern Virginia data centers at Rackspace that are running Mongo and Object Rocket directly on there. And then we use the Rat Connect product to actually bridge the data up into the CloudMine data sources, up into the CloudMine API servers, which is then where it's served out by the mobile devices. So we have a nice hybrid setup here, and that's really how we can get around a lot of the nebulousness that comes with the HIPAA law and cloud resources. The final piece of this is this chain of risk and responsibility. This is where business associate agreements come into play. A BAA is a new concept introduced into the HIPAA world by high-tech in '09. And basically what this means is that every player in a value chain for a specific covered entity, which might be a doctor's office or a hospital, has to be responsible for one part or another of the entire chain of data flow. Before high-tech came out, the big problem was that no one could really point a finger at any of the other vendors in the value chain. It was all sort of treated as this big monolith. If a hospital decided to use Epic as its electronic medical record system, and there was a flaw in the Epic software, it wasn't really clear who was at fault. It wasn't clear who had to bear the load of going to court and paying all the lawyers' fees and all of that. So high-tech introduced this concept of a BAA. It's a contract that delineates this value. So for example, we sign BAAs with our clients who deal with HIPAA-compliant, with our clients who have HIPAA-compliant apps on CloudMine. And that BAA says that they are responsible for tagging the data properly on the client side, and that we are then responsible for storing it, encrypting it, adding all the logging systems and IDS around it. And we in turn have a BAA signed with Rackspace that does the exact same thing with us. So Rackspace is responsible for the physical security, financial security of those data centers, and really everything else that surrounds that level of abstraction within HIPAA. And this happens for every single vendor of every single covered entity that's out there in the market today. And it really helps make things a lot clearer. Theoretically, if there was a breach and data was leaked, sensitive health information was leaked, and it was discovered that the breach was because the iPad application was actually caching this data long-term on the device, and the iPad was stolen and somebody pulled the data off of it, we could point to the BAA and say, no, this is not CloudMine or Rackspace's fault. This is your fault as the client. Unfortunately, given just the litigious nature of this environment, you have to look at the lawsuits or the potential lawsuits and arguments up front in order to make sure you're fully covered in case of an audit and in case of a lawsuit. Very, very fun stuff. So we've learned a number of important lessons in going through this process. It took us, by the way, about, I'd say about a year, maybe a little less than a year, to get fully through the Rackspace legal process to be certified HIPAA compliant. So that was announced publicly back in February. So it was a good road. We're there now, and it's really added a lot to the product. But we've learned a lot. The first is that federal regulations fall really far behind the current state of technology. Once again, my example with high tech, it's so recent. It was just written 5 years ago. It was just put into effect this year. and yet it assumes that health data lives behind a firewall in a data center. It didn't even understand the concept of a mobile device, of cloud, of anything client side. So you have to deal with that. Second thing that we learned is that it's actually really nice, one thing that's nice about this, that a lot of the other regulations out there, such as PCI compliance, actually share the same baseline technical requirements as HIPAA. So what that means is that if you're a company that's going out there and trying to get a number of different certifications for a number of different external regulations, you can really cover a good deal of all of them by just following best firewalling practices, best data security practices, and just going after one of them. Then you have some other layers you add on top for each of the additional compliances, but you really have a lot of it covered. The third thing we've learned is it's all about risk mitigation, and more on that. You have to document everything. We're a smaller company, 3 years old at this point, and we didn't realize how much documentation had to be produced in order to prove that we're HIPAA compliant. And this documentation is all around risk mitigation. You have to document, breach notification policies, employee training and security manuals, like what security training do you make your employees go through, not just for coding, but for just general HR practices. Business continuity documents, disaster recovery plans, all of these things are required as a baseline for HIPAA compliance. So you have to, when somebody comes in and audits you, your job is to prove that you've done everything in your power, reasonable or unreasonable, to make sure that you have reduced the risk for your clients and reduced the risk of this data leaking as much as you could humanly do. And that all has to be captured within the documentation and within your day-to-day practices. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. I'll be around afterwards if you have any questions on this. Despite the topic, I do actually enjoy speaking about these types of compliances. Thank you.